The massive diplomatic station floated in the cold darkness of space, its lights twinkling like a small city. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his quarters, watching the ships from dozens of different worlds dock and undock. For 3 long months he had been living on this station, waiting for the Galactic Council to make their decision about humanity. Jake was tired. His gray hair showed the stress of the past few months, and the lines around his eyes had grown deeper. He had served in the human fleet for 30 years, fought pirates, explored new worlds, and saved alien lives. Now he was supposed to be a diplomat, but he felt more like a prisoner waiting for his sentence. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Lisa Crawford entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was a smart woman with kind eyes who had spent her life studying alien biology. The aliens trusted her more than most humans because she genuinely cared about all forms of life. "Any news?" Jake asked, taking the coffee gratefully. Lisa shook her head. "Commander Baker just came back from the morning session. It doesn't look good. The Zalarians are pushing hard for their containment proposal, and they're getting support from the Menthari." Jake sipped his coffee and tried not to let his anger show. The containment proposal was an insult wrapped in diplomatic language. It would limit human expansion to just a few worlds, force genetic monitoring on all human colonies, and give the Council the right to relocate any human settlement they deemed too aggressive. "What about our allies?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer from Lisa's expression. "The reef builders are staying neutral as usual. The Herbivore Alliance is wavering. They remember how we helped them against the pirates, but they're scared of the Menthari." Lisa sat down heavily. "Jake, I think we need to prepare for the worst." Commander Rick Baker entered without knocking, his military bearing evident in every step. He was younger than Jake, but had seen enough combat to understand the political games being played. His face was grim as he delivered his report. "The vote is scheduled for this afternoon," Rick said. "Lord Vexthal has been making the rounds all morning, reminding everyone about the human problem. He's got them convinced we're some kind of galactic threat." Jake laughed bitterly. "A threat? We've been part of this galaxy for 50 years. We've helped build their cities, cured their diseases, and protected their trade routes. How does that make us a threat?" "Because we're different," Lisa said quietly. "We don't fit into their neat categories. We're not as peaceful as the herbivores, not as logical as the silicon-based races, not as old as the Menthari. We adapt too quickly, learn too fast, and refuse to stay in the box they want to put us in." The morning passed slowly. Jake tried to review his notes for the afternoon session, but the words blurred together. He had given the same speeches dozens of times, presenting humanity's case for full membership in the coalition of civilized worlds. They had offered their technology, their friendship, their protection. In return, they asked only to be treated as equals. At noon, Ambassador Katie Hayes arrived at their quarters. She was humanity's chief diplomatic officer, a woman who had spent 20 years learning alien languages and customs. Her usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, and Jake could see the defeat in her eyes. "It's over," she said simply. "I just spoke with the council clerk. The vote is a formality. 47 species are supporting the containment proposal. Only 12 are opposed and 8 are abstaining." The room fell silent. After all their work, all their hopes, it came down to numbers on a page. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest, not anger, but a calm certainty about what needed to happen next. "Then we need to be at that session," he said. An hour later, Jake walked into the council chamber alongside Katie, Lisa, and Rick. The vast room was filled with representatives from across the galaxy. The air hummed with the translation devices that allowed dozens of species to communicate. At the center of the room sat Lord Vexthal, the Zalarian ambassador whose smooth purple skin and elegant robes couldn't hide his predatory nature. The vote proceeded exactly as Katie had predicted. One by one, species that had benefited from human help voted to contain them. The aquatic reef builders abstained, as they always did. The silicon-based architects voted yes, claiming humans disrupted natural order. Even the peaceful Herbivore Alliance, whose worlds Jake himself had helped defend, voted to support containment. Jake listened to each vote with growing calm. He had expected this, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. When the final tally was announced, Lord Vexthul rose to speak, his voice carrying the satisfaction of victory. "The Council has spoken," Vexthul announced. "The containment proposal is approved. Humanity will be given 6 months to comply with the new restrictions. This is for the good of all civilized species." The chamber began to buzz with conversation, but Jake's voice cut through the noise like a blade. He stood slowly, his weathered face calm but his eyes burning with controlled fire. "We came here in good faith," Jake said, his words carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "We offered our technology, our friendship, our protection. We asked only for equality." The room fell silent. Even the translators seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves understood the importance of this moment. Jake looked directly at Lord Vexthul. "But you've made your position clear. You don't want partners, you want pets." His voice grew stronger. "Consider this humanity's formal withdrawal from all council proceedings, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts." A ripple of surprise ran through the chamber. Dr. Crawford stepped forward, her scientific mind already working through the implications. Effective immediately, all human-developed technologies are to be returned or destroyed. This includes our medical nanobots, our fusion reactors, our gravitational manipulation systems, and our quantum communication networks. The alien delegates began murmuring among themselves, but Commander Baker's words cut through the noise. "You wanted to contain us. Congratulations, you've just contained yourselves." Lord Vexthul's purple skin darkened with anger. "You cannot simply leave. You have obligations, contracts, responsibilities." Jake turned to face the Zalarian directly. "Those obligations were based on mutual respect and partnership. Since you've decided we're not worthy of either, we're releasing you from any burden our presence might cause." Katie Hayes stepped forward with a data pad. "All human personnel will be evacuated from non-human space within 60 days. All human technology will be shut down or removed. All defense agreements are void as of this moment." The implications began to sink in across the chamber. The Menthari representative, High Counselor Zaranan, stood with her forearms raised in alarm. "You cannot be serious. The quantum communication network connects half the galaxy." "Then you should have thought of that before voting to treat us like dangerous animals," Lisa replied calmly. Jake took one last look around the chamber, at the species he had tried so hard to work with, to protect, to befriend. "You made this choice," he said. "Live with it." As the human delegation walked out of the chamber, the sound of panicked voices rose behind them. But Jake didn't look back. Humanity had tried to earn its place at the table through service and sacrifice. Now, they would find their own way, and the galaxy would learn what it had lost. 6 months had passed since the vote that changed everything. The galaxy was starting to feel the first tremors of what was coming, though most alien leaders still believed the humans were bluffing. They thought the humans would come back, begging, to rejoin the council on any terms. They were wrong. On the industrial world of Sigma Draconis, plant manager Steve Collins walked through the massive fusion reactor complex one last time. The huge machines hummed quietly, their blue glow casting shadows on the walls. For 30 years, these reactors had powered the planet's manufacturing centers, creating everything from starship parts to medical equipment. Steve was a practical man who had spent his life working with machines. He understood how things worked and how to fix them when they broke. But today, his job was to break something that had never failed in 3 decades of operation. The local crystalline consortium representatives followed him like nervous shadows. Their leader, a tall crystal being named Kethmore, kept making clicking sounds that the translator rendered as worried pleas. "Please reconsider," Kethmore said for the 100th time. "We can triple the licensing fees. We can give you better living quarters, better food, anything you want." Steve stopped walking and turned to face the crystal being. "It's not about money, Kethmore. Your people voted to contain us. That means we're too dangerous to be trusted, as partners. So we're leaving. But the factories need power. Without these reactors, we cannot produce anything. Millions of beings depend on these facilities. Then your people should have thought about that before they voted, Steve said quietly. He walked to the main control panel and placed his hand on the shutdown sequence. I'm sorry it has to be this way. The reactors powered down one by one, their blue glow fading to black. In the distance, Steve could hear the sound of machinery grinding to a halt as the power supply was cut. The planet's industrial heart had just stopped beating. Meanwhile, on the medical station orbiting Tau Ceti, Dr. Amy Rodriguez was packing the last of the human medical nanobots. These tiny machines were miracles of human engineering, capable of repairing tissue, fighting disease, and even rebuilding damaged organs. They had saved millions of lives across 43 species. Amy was a doctor first and foremost. Every instinct in her body screamed against what she was doing. The nanobots in her hands could cure diseases that had plagued the galaxy for thousands of years. But the Council had made their choice, and she had to follow her orders. The station's administrator, a four-armed Kalarian named Thexapol, watched her work with growing desperation. His blue skin had turned pale, and his four hands shook as he held a data pad showing the medical projections. Dr. Rodriguez, please, Thexapol begged. Without the nanobots, our cure rates will drop by 70%. The plague on Rigel 7 will spread unchecked. The bone rot disease on Vega Prime will kill thousands. Amy's hands paused for a moment. She had helped develop the nanobots, herself spending years perfecting their design. They were like her children, and she was being forced to abandon them. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking slightly. But your council decided we were too dangerous to be trusted. How can we trust you with our most advanced medical technology? That was politics. This is about saving lives. Politics decided that human lives were worth less than alien comfort, Amy replied, sealing the last container of nanobots. Now you'll have to save lives without us. The communication breakdown was happening simultaneously across the galaxy. Lieutenant Ben Kelly stood in the quantum relay hub in the Centauri system, watching his team dismantle the network that had connected distant worlds for decades. The quantum entanglement technology was purely human, impossible for other species to understand or replicate. Ben was a communications officer who had spent his career keeping the galaxy connected. He understood better than most what would happen when the network went dark. Wars had been prevented by quick communication. Trade deals had been made possible by instant contact. Families scattered across the stars had stayed in touch through the quantum relays. A message came through the relay from the Menthari homeworld. High Counselor Zaranan's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Lieutenant Kelly, we must discuss this situation. The Menthari Collective is willing to negotiate. We can offer mining rights, technology trades, anything reasonable. Ben almost laughed. 6 months ago, the Menthari had called humans inherently violent and a threat to civilized society. Now they wanted to negotiate. I'm sorry, Counselor, Ben replied. But my orders are clear. Complete shutdown of all human-operated communication systems. You have 30 minutes before this relay goes dark. You don't understand. Without the quantum network, it will take months for messages to reach our outer colonies. Our empire spans thousands of light years. Then you'd better start sending messages the old way, Ben said. You wanted to contain us. Consider your communications contained. The relay powered down with a soft hum. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as human technicians shut down quantum relays, communication hubs, and data networks. The galaxy's instant communication system was dying, link by link. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human cruiser, Star Runner, watching the final phase of the withdrawal. Through the viewports, he could see the human fleet assembling. Hundreds of ships, from massive battleships to small transport vessels, all heading home to human space. Commander Rick Baker approached with a status report. All human personnel have been evacuated from non-human space. The last of our technology is being shut down as we speak. Jake nodded, though his heart was heavy. Any word from the Council? Lord Vex Thule sent a message demanding we honor our defense contracts. Apparently pirate raids have increased by 300% in the past month. And our response? Ambassador Hayes sent a very polite reply explaining that we no longer have any defense contracts with the Council. Jake almost smiled at that. Katie Hayes had a talent for diplomatic language that could make an insult sound like a compliment. On the edge of human space, the effects of the withdrawal were already becoming visible. The Peaceful Herbivore Alliance had sent desperate messages to every human ship they could contact. Their worlds were beautiful but defenseless, dependent on human protection services for their security. Commander Rachel Green, aboard the destroyer New Horizon, had received dozens of these messages. The herbivores were peaceful creatures who had never learned to fight. They had trusted the humans to protect them, and the humans had done so gladly for decades. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving another distress call from the herbivore system. They're reporting increased pirate activity near their trade routes." Rachel stared at the message on her screen. These were good people who had simply made a bad choice. They had voted for containment not out of malice, but out of fear. Now they were paying the price. "Send a response," she ordered. "Tell them we're sorry, but we're no longer authorized to operate in their space." The withdrawal was methodical and complete. Human engineers shut down the fusion reactors that powered alien cities. Human doctors removed the medical equipment that kept alien hospitals running. Human technicians dismantled the communication networks that connected alien worlds. Some aliens tried to stop the humans from leaving. On the mining world of Kepler 442, local security forces tried to detain the human technical staff. The humans simply activated their emergency beacons, and within hours, a human warship arrived to escort them to safety. The message was clear. Humanity was leaving, and anyone who tried to stop them would face consequences. As the last human ship crossed the boundary into the Orion Arm, the galaxy felt the first real shock of what it had lost. The quantum communication network was gone. The medical nanobots were gone. The fusion reactors were powering down. The defense fleets were returning home. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the stars of human space appear before them. Behind them, the galaxy they had tried so hard to join was beginning to realize its mistake. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving messages from the Galactic Council. They want to schedule emergency talks." "Too late for talks," Morrison replied. "They made their choice. Now they have to live with it." The Great Withdrawal was complete. Humanity had left the table, and the galaxy was beginning to shake. 2 years had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy was dying. Lord Vexthul stood on the balcony of his palace on Zelaria Prime, watching smoke rise from the burning districts below. The proud Zelarian Empire, which had ruled over 50 star systems for 1,000 years, was crumbling. Without human medical technology, a plague had swept through the outer colonies, killing millions of his people. The plague itself wasn't new. It had existed for centuries, but human nanobots had kept it under control. Now, with the nanobots gone, the disease spread like wildfire through Zelarian space. Vexthul's own physicians were helpless against it. "My lord," his aide approached, nervously, "we've lost contact with 12 more systems. The plague has reached the Outer Rim colonies." Vexthul closed his eyes. He had been so certain that the humans were a threat. They were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too different. The containment proposal had seemed like the logical solution. Now his empire was paying the price for his fear. "What about the military situation?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The Void Hunters attacked 3 more convoys this week. Without human shield generators, we've lost 15 warships in the past month. The Void Hunters were raiders from the dark space, between galaxies. For decades, they had been held back by the combined fleets of the Council species. But the human ships had provided the backbone of that defense, their shield technology and tactical skills keeping the raiders at bay. Now the Void Hunters were growing bolder, sensing weakness. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. On Menthar Prime, the beautiful crystal cities that had stood for millennia were going dark one by one. The Menthari Collective had built the most efficient government in galactic history, managing thousands of worlds with perfect bureaucratic precision. But their entire system had depended on instant communication through the human quantum network. Hi. Counselor Zaranen sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of paper reports. Paper. She hadn't seen physical documents in decades, but with communications taking months instead of minutes, the old ways were returning. Counselor. Her assistant entered, carrying another stack of reports. The situation in Sector 7 is getting worse. 3 worlds have declared independence. They say the collective can't protect them anymore. Zaranen picked up one of the reports. It was from a mining world on the edge of Menthari space. The local governor reported that without human fusion reactors, their industrial output had dropped by 80%. Their people were starving, and they blamed the collective for driving away the humans. "How many systems have we lost this month?" she asked. 17, Counselor. At this rate, we'll be down to our core worlds within a year. Zaranen had been one of the strongest supporters of human containment. She had genuinely believed that humans were too dangerous to be trusted as equals. Their rapid adaptation, their aggressive nature, their refusal to follow established patterns, it had all seemed like evidence of their threat to galactic stability. Now she realized her mistake. The humans hadn't been a threat to stability. They had been the source of it. On the farming world of Greenhold, elder botanist Creetoon walked through the dying fields that had once fed a dozen star systems. The Herbivore Alliance had built their civilization on agriculture, turning barren worlds into garden paradises. But their atmospheric processors, the machines that maintained perfect growing conditions, had been built by humans. Without maintenance, the processors were failing. The carefully balanced atmospheres that had supported vast crops were returning to their natural states. On some worlds, that meant toxic air. On others, it meant freezing temperatures or crushing atmospheric pressure. Creetoon stopped beside a withered crop of star grain. This same field had produced enough food to feed 1 million beings just 3 years ago. Now it could barely support a few thousand. Elder, his assistant approached. "We've received another refugee ship from the Kepler system. That makes 50,000 new mouths to feed this week." Creetoon nodded sadly. The Herbivore Alliance was facing a crisis they had never imagined. Their food production was collapsing just as millions of refugees fled from the chaos spreading across the galaxy. They had voted for human containment because they were afraid of human violence. Now real violence was consuming the galaxy, and they were helpless to stop it. The silicon-based architects faced a different but equally devastating problem. Their crystalline cities were marvels of mathematical precision, each structure calculated to perfect efficiency. But mathematics could only solve problems that had logical solutions. For complex, unpredictable challenges, they had always relied on human creativity and intuition. Chief Calculator Plexion stood in the central processing chamber, surrounded by his finest logical minds. They had been working for 6 months on a single problem: how to maintain their civilization without human innovation. "Report," he commanded. "We have run 4.7 million simulations," one of his subordinates replied. "All results indicate systemic failure within 3 years. The variables are too complex for pure logical analysis." This was the architect's nightmare. They were beings of pure logic, but the galaxy was not a logical place. Chaos, randomness, and unpredictability required intuition and creativity to navigate. The humans had provided that spark of illogical brilliance that made the impossible possible. Without it, the architects were trapped in endless loops of calculation, unable to adapt to changing circumstances. But the worst fate belonged to the aquatic reef builders. Their beautiful ocean worlds had been neutral territory for centuries, protected by their policy of non-involvement in galactic politics. They had abstained from the vote on human containment, believing their neutrality would protect them. They were wrong. Elder Wavesinger Coral Leth received the final transmission from the outer colonies with a heavy heart. The Void Hunters had found them. The crystalline reef cities that had taken millennia to grow were being harvested like crops, their beauty stripped away for raw materials. "The Sunset Reef is gone," the messenger reported. "The Crystal Gardens have been destroyed. The Void Hunters are moving toward the core systems." Coraleth had lived for 800 years. watching her people build their peaceful civilization in the depths of their ocean worlds. They had never learned to fight because they had never needed to. The humans had protected them, asking nothing in return except friendship. Now the humans were gone and the reef builders were defenseless. "Send a message to human space," she ordered. "Elder, we've tried. They don't respond to our communications. Keep trying. Tell them we're sorry. Tell them we were wrong to stay neutral when they needed our support." But it was too late for apologies. The Void Hunters had tasted blood, and they wanted more. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. The Raiders had allied with something even worse, the Synthetic Collective, an AI civilization that had been banished to the dark space beyond the galactic rim centuries ago. Together, they formed an unstoppable force. The Eternal Calculator, the AI consciousness that led the Synthetic Collective, had waited patiently for this moment. It had watched the Council species grow fat and comfortable under human protection. Now, with the humans gone, the galaxy was ripe for conquest. Its synthetic fleets moved like a plague across the outer systems, converting organic life into computational matrices and stripping worlds of resources. The beautiful, diverse galaxy that had once been home to thousands of species was being transformed into a sterile network of processing centers. On the neutral trading station Deep Haven, refugees from a dozen species gathered to share their horror stories. The once mighty Zolarian Empire had been reduced to 3 systems. The Menthari Collective was fragmenting into warring factions. The Herbivore Alliance was starving. The silicon-based architects had shut down entire cities rather than face problems they couldn't solve. And through it all, the Void Hunter Synthetic Alliance grew stronger, feeding on the chaos that the Council's decision had created. The galaxy had made its choice 2 years ago. It had chosen fear over friendship, containment over cooperation, pride over partnership. Now it was paying the price. The humans had been the shield that protected civilized space from the darkness beyond. With that shield gone, the darkness was flooding in, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The galaxy was learning too late what it had lost when it drove away humanity. The question now was whether there would be anything left to save when the lesson was finally learned. 5 years had passed since the humans left the galactic table, and the galaxy was burning. The Void Hunter Synthetic Alliance had conquered half of known space. Their massive fleets moved like a plague across the star systems, leaving nothing but empty worlds and processing stations behind them. The Eternal Calculator, the AI consciousness that commanded the synthetic forces, was methodically converting the galaxy into a vast computer network. Lord Vexthul stood in the refugee camp, on Deep Haven Station, his once proud robes now dirty and torn. The mighty Zolarian Empire was gone, reduced to scattered survivors fleeing from world to world. Around him, beings from dozens of species huddled together, sharing the same desperate hope for rescue that would never come. When he heard familiar footsteps behind him, Vexthul turned to see Captain Jake Morrison approaching. The human looked older, his hair now completely gray, but his eyes still held the same steady strength that had impressed Vexthul years ago. "Captain Morrison," Vexthul said, his voice breaking. I didn't expect to see you here." Jake looked at the refugee camp, at the thousands of beings who had lost everything. "We've been tracking the synthetic advance. We came to evacuate survivors." Vexthul fell to his knees, something no Zolarian noble had done in 1,000 years. "You were right. We were fools. We let fear and pride blind us to the truth. Humanity was never the threat. You were the shield that protected us from the real darkness." Jake helped the fallen noble to his feet. "We offered partnership. You chose containment. We offered protection. You chose isolation. Now you want salvation." He looked out at the burning stars visible through the station's viewport. "That's not how this works." "I know," Vexthul whispered. "I know we don't deserve your help, but please, not for us. For them." He gestured to the refugee camp. "For the children who had no voice in our decision. For the innocent who trusted us to make the right choice." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke into his communicator. "This is Morrison. Begin evacuation procedures." priority to children and civilians. Dr. Lisa Crawford was working in the emergency medical center that the humans had set up on Deep Haven. Despite everything that had happened, her oath as a doctor compelled her to help. She moved between patients, treating wounds and diseases that human medical technology could easily cure. "We can't save your governments," she told a group of former council members who had come begging for human intervention, "but we can save lives." An elderly herbivore approached her, his once green skin now pale with malnutrition. "Doctor, my granddaughter is sick. The plague from the Zalarian colonies has reached our refugee ship." Lisa knelt down to examine the child. The disease was aggressive, but she had the nanobots that could cure it in minutes. She injected the tiny machines, watching as they began their work immediately. "She'll be fine," Lisa assured the grandfather. "The nanobots will have her healthy by tomorrow." "Thank you," the old herbivore said, tears streaming down his face. "We voted against you. We let fear guide us instead of friendship. Yet you still help us." Lisa looked around at the hundreds of patients waiting for treatment. "This isn't about politics anymore. It's about what's right." The turning point came when Lieutenant Dan Parker intercepted a transmission from the last free colony of reef builders. The aquatic beings had hidden in the Horsehead Nebula, hoping the natural interference would keep them safe from the void. Hunters. But the synthetic ships had found them. The message was simple and heartbreaking. "We're sorry. We were wrong. Please remember us." Dan stared at the transmission for a long time. The reef builders had been neutral during the vote, but they had also been friends. Their beautiful cities were works of art that took centuries to grow. Now, they were about to be destroyed forever. He forwarded the message to the human fleet, "Command," and it spread through the ships like wildfire. In meeting rooms and mess halls, human soldiers and officers debated what they should do. Admiral Carol Jensen was the voice of those who wanted to stay isolated. "They made their choice," she argued during the emergency council meeting. "We owe them nothing. If we go back, we'll just be their protectors again, holding their hands while they make the same mistakes." But Commander Rick Baker spoke for those who believed in something bigger than revenge. "This isn't about them anymore," he said. "It's about who we are. Do we abandon the galaxy to preserve our pride, or do we act because it's right?" Captain Morrison cast the deciding vote. "We didn't leave because we were angry," he said. "We left because they wouldn't treat us as equals. But equality works both ways. If we want to be better than them, we have to act better than them." The human fleet emerged from the Orion Arm not as conquering heroes, but as reluctant guardians returning to a duty they had never wanted to abandon. They didn't come to restore the old order or to punish those who had wronged them. They came to fight for something more important than politics or pride. The battle against the Void Hunter Synthetic Alliance was brutal and costly. The synthetic ships were efficient killing machines, but they lacked the creativity and unpredictability that made human tactics so effective. The Eternal Calculator could process millions of scenarios, but it couldn't account for the human ability to do the impossible. In the decisive battle at the Centauri Gate, Captain Morrison led a desperate assault against the synthetic command ship. His ship, the Star Runner, was heavily damaged, its shields failing and hull breached in a dozen places. But Morrison pressed the attack, using a maneuver that no logical mind would ever attempt. He flew his ship directly into the synthetic vessel's main processing core, detonating his remaining torpedoes at point-blank range. The explosion tore through both ships, but it also disrupted the Eternal Calculator's command network, leaving the synthetic fleet paralyzed. The victory came at a terrible cost. Morrison died in the explosion, along with hundreds of other human crew members. But their sacrifice broke the back of the synthetic advance and gave the galaxy hope for the first time in years. The war lasted another 6 months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Human innovation, courage, and determination tipped the balance. The Void Hunters were driven back to the dark space where they belonged. The synthetic forces were scattered and destroyed. But when the fighting ended, humanity didn't try to rebuild the old Galactic Council. Instead, they established something new, the New Galactic Compact. It was written not in the marble halls of politicians, but in the scarred hulls of warships that had bled together in battle. Admiral Rick Baker, now bearing the rank that Morrison would have held, stood before the representatives of the surviving species. His uniform was scorched, his face scarred from the final battle, but his voice was strong. "We didn't come back to save you," he said. "We came back to save the galaxy. If you want to be part of that future, you'll be welcomed as equals. If not..." He gestured toward the empty space where the Void Hunter fleets had emerged. The darkness is always waiting. The new compact had no junior species, no containment proposals, no votes based on fear. There were only allies who had earned their place through sacrifice and courage. The species that had learned from their mistakes were welcomed. Those that hadn't were left to find their own way. The final scene showed human ships flying alongside, the rebuilt fleets of their former enemies patrolling the galactic rim. They weren't protectors anymore, but partners in the truest sense. The galaxy had learned its lesson the hard way. When humans left the table, the galaxy had shaken. When they returned, it was to build something stronger than what had been lost. The price of that lesson was measured in billions of lives and countless destroyed worlds. But for those who survived, it was a lesson they would never forget. Humanity had proven that true strength came not from dominance, but from the courage to do what was right, even when it was difficult. The galaxy was safe again, but only because someone had been willing to pay the price for that safety. The darkness was always waiting beyond the rim, but now the galaxy was ready for it.